Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy, your one stop destination for all the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take up today's the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper and we analyze all the various important articles which have appeared in today's paper for the relevance of your examination, be it for the prelims or be it for the mains perspective. At the end of the discussion, as is the case, we shall be taking up a couple of practice questions for the mains examination, and we shall also try to understand the nuances of answer writing with the help of those particular questions. Now, we will initiate the discussion, but before that, a couple of announcements. Now, regarding the Unacademy Civil Services Championship test, now this test shall be conducted on 10th of March, 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. You can appear for the test and avail scholarship and various different prizes, which are very lucrative. Now, about the schedule for the free special classes, which are conducted on a daily basis. So, today's special class schedule. So, you have at 7 a.m. the NCRT fundamentals, then at 7 p.m., that is today evening, we shall be covering the world geography through maps. And today, we are going to cover the portion of Asia. We have covered the various different continents, and today we are going to talk about Asia, its physical features, and all the relevant details required both for your prelims as well as mains exam. At 9 p.m., we shall have a current affairs session for the midweek Indian Express analysis by Asta ma'am. So these are the special sessions that you can always attend in order to gain a sneak peek and a view into the examination preparation. Now, looking at the topics that we are going to hold a discussion for today. So, in total, we are going to have a discussion for 8 different topics. Now, out of them, 4 of ones are going to be in significant detail. First of all, trees in Corbett fall prey to greedy nexus, observes Supreme Court. Now, Supreme Court has come down significantly harshly when it comes to the construction which has been carried out in the region of the Corbett Tiger Reserve. So we are going to analyze that a bit. And Supreme Court has talked about setting up of an empowered committee, what that committee is, what is the mandate of that committee. Then the tale of have money buy miracle drug that has appeared in the editorial section that is relevant for your GS paper 3. So this is about the utility of various different drugs and the usage of them on the larger public without proper testing. Then, safeguarding local democracy. This has appeared in page 9. This is a continuation of the Chandigarh mayoral elections which were held and the intricacies thereby. Are legislators immune to bribery charges? This has appeared in page 10, again relevant for your GS paper 2. Now, this is with regards to the observations and the ruling which has been made by the Supreme Court, the 7 judge bench of the Supreme Court, which has held the fact that the legislators, the elected members, and the elected representatives, they cannot simply be immune to taking bribery for, let's suppose, casting votes or any purpose otherwise. So that is something that we are going to discuss in detail again. Then INS Jatayu, which has been set up in the Minicoy Islands. So that is a naval base, and it will render a significant geostrategic advantage when it comes to India's expansion, or rather, the expansion of naval activities in the Indian Ocean region. Then, deadliest year for migrants as per the International Organization of Migrants. So, with the help of this article, we are going to analyze that particular organization, the report that it brings out significantly on a periodic basis. Diamond exports to slump to 5-year low. Then 2023 El Nino is amongst the strongest on record. That is as per World Meteorological Organization. So these are the various different topics that we are going to hold a discussion for. And we start the discussion with the topic which has appeared in page 1 and also in the later portions of page 14 as well. And that is about the Supreme Court's observation regarding what has been going on in the Corbett Tiger Reserve. Now, to set the context and the brief background of it, let us first of all become completely aware that why is it that this topic is in discussion and why only Corbett Tiger Reserve is in discussion? Basically, tiger reserves, when you hear about the term tiger reserves, the constitution of tiger reserves has always been done for a single point agenda, a single point purpose, and that is provide natural habitat for the conservation of tigers. So that tigers can exist in their natural landscape, they can get the required amount of food, and they can have a larger space for themselves. Now, that is the purpose, and we have seen a tremendous increase in the tiger population over the past few years due to the successes that the government and the various different organizations have achieved in enforcing regulatory standards and regulatory mechanisms in prohibiting various human activities when it comes to the tiger reserves. Now, the National Tiger Conservation Authority, NTCA, NTCA is the nodal agency when it comes to both Project Tiger as well as the delineation and demarcation of the tiger reserve areas. Now, this NTCA is also a statutory organization. It is a nodal agency for Project Tiger. Okay. Now, Corbett Tiger Reserve is amongst the first protected areas which had been established in our country in the region of the marshes and the Tarai belt of Uttarakhand. And that Corbett Tiger Reserve, which was set up pre-independent India in itself, now that has been one of those which has observed, as per the latest tiger census, one of the highest density of the big cat population. But there were reports in the media that there have been significant amount of trees which have been cut for construction of various different types of structures, concrete, iron pillars, and such kind of structures in the middle of the forest. And the argument was that this was done in order to facilitate ecotourism. Now think about it. Close to 6,000 trees have been felled in order to carry out the construction. So that means a significant portion of the forest habitat has been subverted for these construction activities. Now, this is where the Supreme Court has come down very heavily. Supreme Court has come down very heavily on the previous forest minister of the state of Uttarakhand and the previous DFO as well, and asked very stinging and pointed questions that how can you allow such construction to happen, and is there a real requirement of allowing such ecotourism such as tiger safaris, etc., in the middle of the core zone of the tigers where it can endanger the tiger population as well. Now, with regards to that, there have been two articles which have come. First is regarding Supreme Court's own observation and the directive that it has set. And secondly, the observation that resorts near the tiger reserves have turned into wedding destination. And mind you, this is not the first instance when this case has erupted and broken through the national headlines. You actually will come across a series of such cases and news reports which have frequented the news stories for the past few years. For example, in Karnataka, NTCA found 9 illegal resorts in tiger reserve limits. So that in itself tells you that if proper regulation is not carried out, then the tiger habitat is at risk. Now, here, understand that when we talk about encroachment into the tiger territories, what do we mean by that? So, any tiger reserve, for that matter, in a very plain manner, in a very simple manner, has got two zones. One is what is referred to as the core zone, the other is what is referred to as the buffer zone. Okay? Now, as per the guidelines of the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, which was subsequently amended in 2006 in order to provide teeth to the NTCA as well. Now, as per those guidelines, the core zone should be absolutely undisturbed. It should be the absolute natural habitat that you provide to the tigers, unhindered access to the natural habitat and the forest. Buffer zone also has got restrictions, but in buffer zone, in comparison, you can still carry out some anthropogenic activities as long as they are sustainable and eco-friendly. You can still carry out some activities here and there. Now, what has been found out, particularly in the case of the Corbett Tiger Reserve, is that construction has happened in a very unsustainable manner in the buffer zone, but that encroachment has entered into the core zone as well. Now, ideally, the preconceived notion in the mind would also be that look, tourism is also important. So, what is such a sanctified fact about the core zone that we don't establish any kind of construction or we don't allow ecotourism, etc.? Understand that tigers, they are basically solitary animals. An adult tiger for himself or herself is said to have required close to around an area of 100 square kilometer. A large area of 100 square kilometer is required by one tiger. Why? In order to gain access to its prey, right? Otherwise, it basically runs the risk of falling short of food, thereby growing weaker and then falling prey to attacks by other different rival members of the tiger family as well. So that endangers the tiger population. That is why, in order to avoid that interspecies conflict, those core zones have always been kept as undisturbed areas, undisturbed regions. Now, Supreme Court, in its observation, has also said that look, forests do need tigers, and tigers need the forest. Forests cannot survive without the tigers, and tigers cannot survive without the forest. So we need to preserve the forest. Now, one part of this statement is understood by everyone that yes, tigers need forest. But why does a forest need a tiger? Can't we have a forest without a tiger? What is so wrong in that? So tigers are included in a kind of species. When we talk about the different types of species, tigers are included in a kind what we refer to as the keystone species. Keystone species. What do we mean by keystone species? So the concept comes from the exact English interpretation and translation of a keystone. So keystone, when you hear about this, is a term which was used in architectural parlance, referring to those kind of stones and those kinds of constructions on which the entire weight of the building would stand. So if you would remove the keystone, the entire building could collapse. So here also, when we talk about keystone species, tigers are those kind of animals on which the entire survivability of the ecosystem depends. If the tigers they are eliminated, the ecosystem can actually rupture. How? Let us understand with a very simple and brief example. So first of all, let us consider the very simple kind of a food chain that you have grasses consumed by deer, that is consumed by the apex predators as they are known as. Let's suppose by anthropogenic events, by natural causes, or by any of the factors, if this tiger population is eliminated, let's suppose they go extinct, then what will happen? This deer population, they will have no check, no natural check and balance to keep their population in control. So this deer population will experience a kind of a population explosion. Their numbers will start rising because there is no apex predator which will feed on them. So, as a consequence, when the deer's numbers rise at an unsustainable level, now what will the deers consume? They will consume the grasses and the plants. So, if suddenly you have 100,000 deers in a particular area, think about the sustenance of the natural green vegetation. That will again be thrown out of control. So, as a consequence of that, these grasses, these plants, their existence is put at risk. You run the risk of carrying out overgrazing, rendering the soil barren, leading to soil erosion and land degradation in the long run. So, in order to maintain that natural ecosystem of green vegetation, in order to maintain that natural ecosystem of forestry, the forest does need the tiger. That is why they are referred to as a key. Now, the Supreme Court has basically advised setting up of criminal charges and initiating criminal proceedings against the previous forest minister, and Supreme Court has observed that there is a nexus between the politicians and the administrators, something that all of us are aware of in the larger parlance, in the larger context, that there is always that kind of a nexus. It is that nexus which is killing the tigers, which is basically making them bereft of any of the natural habitat. Now, for that, it has asked for the setting up of a committee. Now, that committee will have or will comprise of various members. So, as per that committee, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change will have a committee which will get the representatives from NTCA, National Tiger Conservation Authority, a representative of the Wildlife Institute of India, a representative of Central Empowered Committee. What is this Central Empowered Committee? So basically, back in 2002, in order to observe, or rather, in order to supervise whether indeed all the provisions of Wildlife Protection Act and the wildlife conservation are followed or not, in order to carry out a detailed monitoring that whether the tiger population is being endangered by anthropogenic interventions or not, the Central Empowered Committee was set up to oversee these factors. So that is where the Central Empowered Committee also comes in to oversee the formulation and adherence to the Wildlife Conservation Act. And an officer of the ministry, not below the rank of Joint Secretary. So this is the committee that Supreme Court has recommended to be set up. And that committee has got a mandate, a fourfold mandate. The mandate of that committee is recommend measures for restoration of damage in the local in situ environment. In situ environment means what? Means the region where the species belongs naturally, right? In situ form of conservation and ex situ form of conservation. These are two principal methods of carrying out conservation of any kind of species. In situ is where, let's suppose, a tiger is found in this area. You conserve the tiger population, preserve the tiger population in this area itself. That is in situ. Ex situ is, let's suppose you have the tiger population in this area which is endangered. You transfer them into a protected area, into a zoo, and then you carry out conservation. That is ex situ. So here, restoration of damages in the local in situ environment, in that environment where the tigers are naturally found, in the tiger reserve areas. Then assess the environmental damage caused in the Corbett Tiger Reserve and evaluate the cost for restoration. Supreme Court, in fact, went ahead and even stated that whatever the cost of damage has to be borne out by the people who have violated the norms. That is, the when the initiation of the criminal charges will be done against those previous ministers and the DFOs, those people will be held liable for all the damage and all the restoration expenses. Identify the persons or officials responsible for such damage. Specify how funds collected from delinquent officials and persons can be utilized for the active restoration. So it is slightly about restoration and fixing that accountability. But along with that, Supreme Court has also tasked this committee with a larger agenda. And for that, it has asked the NTCA to play a lead role in that. And that is the allowance of ecotourism activities such as tiger safaris and various different types of travel and tourism carried out in the reserve areas, and to specify the norms for the entire country. As I told you, the violation of the norms are rampant not only in the Corbett region but in various different tiger reserves of the country. So that is where a detailed mandate has been sought from the NTCA to explore whether tiger safaris are carried out in a sustainable way. If yes, then what can be the methods to include a sustainable development in that area? If no, what can be the outcome of this? So that is the aspect of this entire article. So in this, we have studied about what is the background, why this matter has come before the Supreme Court. We have discussed the observations made by the Supreme Court, the tiger reserve area, its details, what are keystone species, why tiger is held to be relevant for the conservation of forest ecosystem, and then the committee that has been set and its mandate. Now we move on to the second article, but before that, an announcement regarding the UCAN, that is the Current Affairs Navigator program, where it is going to be a one stop destination for all your current affairs needs, including the different newspapers, the PIB, Yojana, Kurukshetra, Political Weekly, Down to Earth. You will have a total of 16 sessions held throughout the month, making you well versed with the portion of current affairs in all different subjects and in all different topics. Now, coming to the second article, which has appeared in the editorial section, and that is about the tale of Have Money by Miracle Drug. Now, this entire article has been written after a particular drug has been in news, has been in quite relevance for the past couple of weeks. And that drug is semaglutide. So, that is the drug which is in the point of contention. Now, why is this drug in so much of news? For the past couple of weeks, you would have come across various news reports and headlines about the shortage and the crisis for the availability of this drug in the market. Now, this drug is said to be a cure for type 2 diabetes. Okay, so that is one of the usages and the cure for type 2 diabetes, right? Along with that, this drug is also said to be fighting against obesity, right? So it can even take care of obesity, and that is why it is in significant amount of demand, because the World Health Organization has previously flagged it multiple number of times that obesity is a problem that the world is going to grapple with in this particular century and in the coming decades. So obesity is a real problem at hand. But when you get such drugs available in the market, there is always that temptation to use it wherever and whenever possible. So whosoever has the money, they will always end up using. Due to this, the drug manufacturer for semaglutide has basically come out with a statement that we are running short of supply due to the supply chain logistics, etc. And that has created a kind of a furor, a kind of a black marketing for this drug as well. But this article here analyzes about the safety and the efficacy of these drugs. Because mind you, these drugs, first of all, they are not available or they are not cleared for usage in India. So how is it that a drug is given clearance? On what parameters do we declare that, okay, this drug you can use, this drug you cannot use? So if you, let's suppose a pharma company comes up with a new formulation, a new drug, it carries out testing. Testing is required, first animal testing. Then if that is successful and found to be safe, then you go for human trials. In those human trials, which can span for around 2 years, you basically measure the efficacy of the drug, and more importantly, you end up monitoring the side effects caused by the drugs. Right? Only after 2 years of observation is done. After that, if all the parameters are found to be safe and functional, then that drug is cleared for the larger public use, and then that drug can be sold in that market. So the entire process is, let's suppose the pharma company, right? Pharma company. First of all, it will apply for clearance. For clearance. After getting that clearance goes the animal trials for safety and efficacy. After again getting the clearance after this, then you have the human trials. Human trials can go on for 2 years. After those human trials, if they are successful, then utility in the market. Okay. Now, when we talk about semaglutide, this is not cleared and this has not been tested on Indian people or the Indian public. Why is that important? If it has been tested on people, let's suppose in the US or in Norway or in Denmark, shouldn't that suffice? The answer is no. That does not suffice. Why? Because when we talk about any particular drug formulation, how it interacts with our own human body, that is subject to differences from one region to another. Because the type of natural immunity, the type of natural exposure that you are subjected to as an individual belonging from one region will be substantially different from an individual from, let's suppose, Europe. The kind of antibodies that a person in India will naturally develop owing to the exposure to the surroundings, that will be very, very different. Then also, let's suppose in India, we keep on administering certain types of medicine from the very young age. Let's suppose paracetamol, let's suppose its version Dolo, etc. Now, that impacts the body's defense mechanism in a different way. So, as a consequence, the efficacy of the drug, such as semaglutide, that will be different. The side effects can be substantially different. So, that brings us to the need for clearance in local market. Local market here refers to the Indian market. So, here, individuals have different immunity. Body mechanism is different. Differs. And when I say body mechanism, the antibody is generated, the kind of response that the body or the system generates. As a result or a consequence of both of these, side effects will also be different. So that is the worrying part. Now here, what actually happens is that even if, let's suppose, this drug is not cleared for usage in Indian market, the media doesn't talk about it. The media houses, when they started writing very illustrious articles about the benefit of semaglutide, they did not mention and they do not highlight it enough that this has not been tested on Indian subjects or Indian public till now. Then, after that, due to the irresponsibility of the media, many of the people, they are unawares about the side effect and they want to buy it at any cost. Then second, another issue is that many of the doctors also start prescribing the drug to the affluent people and to their patients. Now, if a drug is not cleared for utility in a local market, you can still import it. Hospitals can also import it on a case to case and a case by case basis, and also for administering it in small doses. So it has to be a case by case clearance. So the doctors also recommend it. And then these medicines are imported. And that is where the irresponsible consumption starts. And that irresponsible consumption can lead to disastrous impact. The article has basically highlighted that previously also you had many such drugs which flooded the market, which flooded the imagination of the people that look, this drug can be a cure for all the various diseases that you are suffering from. And later on, these pharma companies had to file a compensation in tune of billions of dollars to compensate for the side effects that the general public faced. So why to take ourselves to that scenario or to that extent? So what is the way forward? The way forward is, first of all, awareness spreading mechanism should be punctual. For any such drug, the statutory caveat needs to be attached that this has not been tested on the Indian public and thereby the side effects are completely unknown. So the general public should refrain from using these drugs en masse. Secondly, the regulatory authorities, they need to take or keep a keener eye, a sharper eye, looking into where these drugs are used and whether they are misused or not. So that is another aspect. And then you need responsible doctors, aware patients. So these four things, if they are kept in mind, that is when we will have a safe consumption rather than if you have money, buy any drug that you want and face the consequences later on. So if I talk about the way forward, first of all, will be role of media and pharma companies. They also need to highlight, okay? Then secondly, role of regulator to monitor where these drugs are being used in what parlance, awareness, patients, and doctor responsible prescription. Okay, so these are the way forward, and that will ensure sustainability of consumption. Now, then we move on to the third article, and that is safeguarding local democracy. Now we analyze the article regardless of whatever the partisan tonality is there, which is mentioned in the article. We try to understand what is the crux that it wants to convey. Now, this is about the Chandigarh mayoral election, which was held, and later on, the entire election process was restored by the intervention of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court had exercised its power under Article 142, under the provisions of which the Supreme Court can basically take up any of the misdeeds and misdoings in order to provide a complete justice. So that is where Supreme Court invoked this article, its right under this article, and basically quashed the kind of electoral malpractice which was carried out in the mayoral election. Now, the normal proceeding would have been, as the court president had said, the president in terms of what had taken place in the previous such elections and the rulings for such elections which were dubious, which were doubtful. The court had earlier and in the earlier cases passed on the judgment that hold the elections once again, right? Repolling should be done. But in this case, the Supreme Court did not allow for repolling. Supreme Court, in fact, ordered the opening of all the ballot papers in front of itself. And that is when it restored the candidature and the mayor position of the Aam Aadmi Party candidate. Now, why did the Supreme Court do this? Supreme Court could have ordered a repoll, but as this case was being dragged in front of the Supreme Court as the proceedings were going on, simultaneously, you had three of the legislators of one particular party switching ship and switching the mood into other political party, that is BJP in this particular case. Now, Supreme Court wanted to end that horse trading, as it termed, and that is where it basically restored the election. But what has happened as a consequence? Now, you have the mayor from the Aam Aadmi Party whose position has been upheld. Okay, whose position has been upheld, and the Aam Aadmi Party candidate has been made as the mayor. Now, in the meanwhile, from this party, you had three people who switched on to another political party. Three members who switched. Now, these three members who switched to the other political party meant what? That the post of deputy mayor, right, as well as when we talk about the senior deputy mayor, both of them, they were basically elected. Mayor, both of them were elected by the representatives of the other political party. So what that means is in that local self or the local municipality, now due to that switching over of three members, this political party gains a majority, right? So the mayor, regardless of whichever political party he belongs to, faces a kind of a tough task ahead. So this article argues about the fact that look, you still have horse trading, which can influence the decision making process in the entire local self government. That horse trading is being used quite significantly for the past significant number of years, for the past almost couple of decades now and more, in order to influence the local level election. Local level elections have become a matter of pride. And mind you, when the 73rd and the 74th Amendment to the Constitution was brought about to actually propagate democracy to the grassroots levels by promoting the Panchayati Raj institutions and the municipal corporations, the idea at that point of time was that the people who will be elected in these local governments, they would be apartisan, right? They would not have much of a political affiliation. But such is the case of electoral democracy and the political parties, that all the local members and the local representatives, they belong from one political party or the other. So that is one of the things which has brought about partisan uh, politics and partisan system in the local self government, thereby impacting the governance of that area. Now, when this happens, this is something which cannot take place in the case of Rajya Sabha or in the case of Lok Sabha election, because then anti-defection law will kick in. But when it comes to the local elections and the local corporations, anti-defection law is not active here. Anti-defection laws impact and its provisions, they are not valid for the local body election. As a result of that, what happens? You have people frequently switching sides. You had the instance 5 years back as well, when you had legislators of in the Karnataka assembly, they basically belong to one political party. All of them defected and chose a mayor against the party's wishes and basically chose a mayor of the opposition political party. So that happened in Karnataka assembly as well. So these events, they keep on recurring. So this mayoral position has become more of a kind of a nomenclature position, because most of the steering is done by these political parties who carry out that horse trade. So that is why this article actually argues that one needs to go for anti-defection laws and its stringent provisions to be enacted in the local bodies as well. That is when democracy can be safeguarded. But here, the aspect is that this anti-defection law is active in when it comes to the state legislative assemblies, when it comes to the parliament, their anti-defection law is active. But there also you see such mass migrations and mass defections without much of an impact and a kind of a very blatant impunity. So why is that the case? So that provision of anti-defection law needs to be taken a relook into. And as per the anti-defection law provisions, it is the speaker always, or the chairperson of the house, who is entrusted with disqualifying the member or taking the required action. But mostly because the speaker belongs to one political party, that is why you don't have these actions carried out very frequently. Any kind of partisan alignment basically puts in doubt the entire process. As is the case with the Chandigarh mayoral election also, the details and the provisions of how that mayoral election in the municipality should be carried out, that is carried out as per the norms of the Punjab and Haryana legislature. Now, as per those provisions, in that urban local body, the presiding officer can be elected, can be selected, who is not a candidate, and that presiding officer will take care of the entire electoral process. Now, previously in the Chandigarh mayoral election, what had happened was the fact that a presiding officer was selected who was a member of one political party, elected member of BJP, and eventually, when the polling and the voting finished, you had neck to neck tie, and it was that presiding officer's intervention which decided the victor. That is why this time's election was held in camera and it was recorded. And that is something which the Supreme Court used in order to restore the election. So all of this happens why? Because there is a lack of accountability and there is a feeling that even if, let's suppose, we do this, there is not much of a repercussion that we will face. The only way to get rid of this problem which is plaguing the grassroots of the democracy, that is the local bodies, is to come up with a very stringent defection law provisions and its timely inference and timely action taken by the speaker. Okay, now then we move on to the next article, and that is, are legislators immune to bribery charges? Now, this is an article based upon the 7-judge bench of the Supreme Court and the observation that the bench made, where the bench said that, look, we cannot possibly make any particular individual legislator or member of parliament immune to bribery charges. That is, if a person is taking a bribe for, let's suppose, voting or for, let's suppose, a speech, now that bribe is not something which is covered under the parliamentary privileges that they have. Now, this was a kind of an ongoing case, a result, and this judgment was a kind of a resultant of an ongoing case. And this case was basically initiated due to the case of Sita Soren. Now, Sita Soren, now she is a member of the Jharkhand Mukti Morcha, the JMM. Now, there have been allegations against Sita Soren that she took bribery for voting in the Rajya Sabha elections in 2012. Okay, so in 2012, in order to cast her vote for a candidate in Rajya Sabha election, she has taken bribe. Now, immediately a charge sheet was issued. Now, Sita Soren went to the Jharkhand High Court and filed the injunction that, look, my privileges are covered as per Article 194, Article 105 for the Parliament, and Article 194 for the state legislature. They are responsible for providing the parliamentary privileges. We will talk about those articles as well, the relevance of those articles. Now, the Jharkhand High Court quashed her appeal. So, this matter came to the doorsteps of the Supreme Court. Last year, the Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud, while he was examining the case, he looked at the previous precedent for this judgment. And thereupon, he stumbled upon the P.V. Narasimha Rao case, right? The P.V. Narasimha versus State, the case of 1998. Now, as per that, that particular case was also much in news and much in headlines at that point of time because of the fact that many of the members of the parliament were seen openly taking a bribe for casting vote against the no confidence motion for the government. And that is where, at that point of time, ironically, the person who was again in the dock was actually Shibu Soren, the patriarch of JMM and the father in law of Sita Soren. The irony is that the members of the same family, they are involved in those repetitive judgments. Now, the PV Narasimha Rao case versus the state, that was again for the bribery charges. Now, here, couple of judges in that case, they basically held the statement and they held the observation that, look, taking bribery for any kind of voting that you do, that is illegal. That is not covered under your parliamentary privilege. But then the majority held the opinion at that point of time that, look, if you discern the exact narrow definition as per Article 125, then a parliamentarian is actually free to do what he wants or she wants on the floor of the House. They are immune to it. So, as per the PV Narasimha Rao case, an individual legislator could be immune, could be held immune, even if they have taken bribe. Sita Soren's case went to the doorsteps of the Supreme Court, invoking the P.V. Narasimha Rao judgment, which was passed in 1998. Now, Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, while examining the case last year, he basically observed that I do not agree with the ruling or the judgment of the P.V. Narasimha Rao case itself. So, how can I use that judgment in order to make a fresh new opinion? So that is when the Supreme Court referred this case to a larger seven-judge bench. That a larger seven-judge bench will take a look into this case. Now that seven-judge bench has arrived at a judgment whereby they have said that, look, taking bribe is not covered under parliamentary privilege. Okay. So as a result of that, any individual legislator or member of parliament who are taking bribes, they can be held culpable and they can be punished. Now, this article we are talking time and time again. What is this article? The article which gives privileges. So that is 105, Article 105 for the member of parliaments and Article 194 for the members of state legislature. So 194 for the state legislature. Now, this article, if you take a look, it has got four different provisions, but just let's take a look at the two clauses itself. Subject to the provisions of this constitution and to the rules regulating the procedure of the parliament, there shall be freedom of speech in the parliament. That is the prime purpose of this article, ensuring freedom of speech in the parliament. Then, no member of parliament shall be liable to any proceedings in any court in respect to anything said or any vote given by him in parliament or any committee thereof, and no person shall be so liable in respect of publication by or under the authority of either house of parliament for votes. What does this mean? And what is the purpose? The purpose is simple: to have the members and to give the members a kind of an immunity against, let's suppose, criminal defamation. If they have said something on the floor of parliament, you can have any individual coming up and filing a lawsuit, a litigation for defamation, that that individual member, minister or MP, they have said a statement which is hurtful. Now that will curb the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression. Floor of the house is where decisions have to be taken. So for that, in order to provide and grant that immunity to them, Article 105 and Article 194 of the Constitution, they come into aspect. Now, it was as per the provisions of the subclause 2 of Article 105, where you see no member shall be liable to any proceeding in any court of law with respect to anything said or the vote given. It was as per this provision that the PV Narasimha Rao versus the state judgment of 1998 was actually passed. And they said that they have taken money for vote. We cannot raise question on how they have voted. We cannot put a question mark on that. That is why Shibu Soren at that point of time basically gained some immunity. Now this time, Sita Soren, that is his daughter-in-law, also who is alleged to have taken the same money or in the same manner taken money for Rajya Sabha election, she also sought immunity under the same provision. But this time, the Supreme Court went ahead and reversed the earlier decision and said, we don't agree with the PV Narasimha Rao judgment. Right? So that is the entire crux here. Now, here the argument which was made was the fact that look, when you talk about the punishing those legislators or those member of parliaments who are taking bribes, the house also has got such kind of a privilege. The parliament can also initiate proceedings against the members who are defaulters or who have committed some such kind of events. So where is the court intervening? Isn't it a kind of a judicial overreach? The Supreme Court then observed that look, the members or the legislators own rule and it's their own functionality, and when it comes to going for legislations, delivering speeches, casting votes, they are not impacted by the Supreme Court's intervention. So Supreme Court's intervention can be carried out, and one has to understand that it is not as if anywhere and everywhere Article 105's provisions can be used or exercised to gain immunity. There can be certain cases, and twofold test is required for the assertion of this privilege. Only in that twofold test, if you pass that, only then will that be applicable. What is that twofold test? Privilege claim has to be tethered to the collective functioning of the House. So, whatever action that you are doing, whether that is for the larger benefit of the House or not, if yes, fair enough. Bribery obviously cannot be one such action. Its necessity must bear a functional relationship to the discharge of the duties by the legislator. If you are carrying out your duty and under that you are carrying out any such actions, fair enough, Article 105 and 194 will provide you with a kind of an immunity. But when it comes to the entire basic functionality of 105, it is to provide a freedom for the legislators, for the elected members to carry out the legislative process. And if you take bribe to gain a vote, to take a vote, to cast a vote, to make a speech in parliament, that hinders with the very basic free speech. That contravenes that aspect of providing that free speech. That is where the court has argued that whatever we are saying for this case, it is going to be applicable even for Rajya Sabha elections and even for the speeches made in parliament. Now, this has got larger ramifications. First of all, for bribery charges against speeches made in parliament. Now, the very famous the Maua Moitra case which is going on, the direct implication will be felt on that as well. Because as per this, the parliamentary privileges don't act or they are not applicable there. Secondly, when the Supreme Court has said that all this observation will be applicable even in the case of the Rajya Sabha election, means what? When we talk about the Kuldeep Nair case of 2006, the very famous Kuldeep Nair case, for under which Supreme Court had basically said that look, anti-defection law won't be applicable here. The aspect of cross voting, the aspect of the fact that even if you are not from a particular state, you can still fight Rajya Sabha elections from that state. That Kuldeep Nair judgment basically said that Rajya Sabha elections are not a part of the legislative business. Rajya Sabha elections are a mere exercise of the franchise that the individual legislators have. Now, this might appear to be very similar, but they are not a part of legislative business. Means what? That in the case of Rajya Sabha elections, the party whip does not act. The party whip does not have its jurisdiction there. So, if the party whip does not have its jurisdiction there, you cannot enforce anti-defection law provisions. That is why cross-voting in Rajya Sabha has been in news. Now, if the Supreme Court says that all these provisions are applicable even in the case of the Rajya Sabha election, means Supreme Court in a way is sanctifying the Rajya Sabha election as a legislative business. But further clarity on both these important cases, which are going to come in front of the Supreme Court in the nearby days, is going to lie on the fact that how the Supreme Court interprets the case of cross voting and also the case of the speeches made against the charges of bribery. So that is what the entire article is about. So in this article, what is it that we have discussed? We have basically discussed the aspect of the Supreme Court ruling, the Sita Soren case, the PV Narasimha Rao case, under what provisions in the PV Narasimha Rao case the immunity was provided, why it was provided, which are the articles in contention, Article 105, Article 194. Now, the father-in-law gained immunity, but the daughter-in-law could not, right? Because the Supreme Court changed its mind and changed its opinion. And the Supreme Court had set up a 7-judge bench and the observations of the Supreme Court and its implications. Okay. Now we come to certain articles relevant for your prelims. So here the first article, Navy commissions INS Jatayu MH-60R helicopter squadron. Now, amidst all the squabble which is grabbing national headlines regarding the ousting of the Indian Defense Forces from the region of Maldives and the incursion of China in the Maldivian waters, in light of that, this is the news which is a significant positive for Indian strategic community. INS Jatayu is basically a naval base in the Minicoy Island. In the Minicoy Island, India has now got 2 naval bases. One is, if you take a look at the location of this, right, these are the Lakshadweep Islands. They are also coral islands, just like the case of the Maldives. Now, here is the Minicoy Island, right? Here is Kavarati. Now, it is here that you already have an existing naval base in the name of INS Deep Rakshak. Okay, so you already have INS Dweep Rakshak rather. Dweep Rakshak means protector of the island. And here you have INS Jatayu, which has been established immediately to the north of the Maldivian region. Now, mind you, Maldives was not a region where India had deployed its strategic assets. Maldives is not a region where India had deployed its surveillance mechanism. India had simply donated the Dornier aircraft to Maldives for humanitarian and disaster relief purposes. And in order to maintain that and for functionality of that aircraft, that is why defense personnel were posted there. But in light of the present kind of tussle which is going on between India and Maldives, India has now established a full-fledged naval base there. That is very important. Because Minicoy Islands, its location is very strategic. As you can see, Minicoy Islands lies in between the 9-degree and the 8-degree channel. Now, what is this 9-degree, 8-degree? In Andaman, you have the 10-degree channel. How is it that these channels are named? Very simple. They are named after the latitudes which pass through that area. So here you have 9-degree north, 8-degree north. Okay. Now, this 9-degree channel, setting up of a naval base here, will allow and will help the Indian Defense Forces to monitor all the kind of a traffic underwater systems which are prevalent in this area. And more importantly, monitor the Chinese ships and the actions going on. Now, in light of this development, the first squadron of MH-60R, this is a very potent naval helicopter, something that Indian Defense Forces and Indian Navy was eyeing for a long time. Now, these MH-60R squadron, that is multi-role, mostly for anti-submarine warfare. And these helicopters, they can lurk over the waters in a region, they can detect the submarine and fire the missiles and the torpedoes required. India till now relied upon the old Russian helicopter for that, and that would be the Kamov 31, KA-31 helicopters. But then they have gotten pretty old, and the modern sensors, etc., a larger recon mission, etc., that needs to be carried out. For that, MH-60R, and a deal had been struck with US. Now, in the case of the Russian choppers and the Russian defense equipment, there is also that aspect of large maintenance cost. Now, this is where the maintenance cost is also a bit less. So that is where, for the chopper fleet, for the fixed rotor fleet, this is a good news, and this will help expand our naval activities in the surrounding waters, the nearby region. Okay. Now, then here basically for the prelims perspective, you need to be aware of the two naval bases, Dviprakshak in Kavarati, Jatayu in Minicoy, and you have 9-degree channel between Kavarati and Minicoy, and below Minicoy, you have the 8-degree channel. So 9-degree channel can be important for your exam, and 8-degree channel can also be important for you. Then, with 8,565 deaths, UN says 2023 was the deadliest year in a decade for migrants. Now, this report has been made by the International Organization for Migration. Now, this International Organization for Migration that monitors the migrants moving from one area to another. And the observation has been that because the regular routes for movement of people from one region to another, they have been blockaded, there have been restrictions. So people traditionally are using unconventional routes to move from one region to another. And as a consequence of using these unconventional routes, they are exposed to perils of nature like the disasters in Mediterranean, which claimed more than half of the migrant population, or border patrols, etc. Now, as a result of that, the migrants, they are being pushed to the jaws of the death. Now, while this talks about the perils of migration, here let us understand and let us focus on International Organization for Migrants. Now, this is an organization, it is an intergovernmental organization that provides services and advice associated with migration to governments and migrants, including refugees, internally displaced people, and migrant workers. It is a UN body, was established in 1951. And when it was established in 1951, it was established as Intergovernmental Committee for European Migration to help resettle people displaced by World War II. That is when this was set up. Now, this organization comes out with the World Migration Report, which is published every year. This becomes relevant for your exam. This becomes relevant for your examination. Okay. Now, diamond exports to slump to 5-year low in 2023-24. Now, India is one of the largest exporters of polished and finished diamonds. Now, this year, there's a slump which is expected due to the impact that the global economies are facing due to the pessimistic economic outlook that is developing across. Now, diamond industry, when it faces a lower level of export, then it is also confronted with the harsh reality that there shall be many job losses. And the trained artisans that you have, they also eventually, if they lose their job, they will be seeking employment in some other sector. So there is also that threat, there is also that danger of losing that talent, that traditional and generational talent of diamond cutting and polishing, that can also be lost. Okay, so here basically the two largest markets of the world, that is US and China, they are the ones from where the demand has been subdued. And the demand has also been subdued because the very prevalent and prominent lab grown diamonds, which are making fashion rounds as of now. Okay, now then we come to the last article, that is 2023 El Nino is amongst the strongest in the world. Now here, El Nino is a part of the Enzo cycle, that is El Nino Southern Oscillation. Now in the region of the Pacific, you have three conditions: neutral, El Nino, and La Nina, right? And the aspect of it oscillates. The conditions oscillate from one to another. And because the conditions oscillate from one portion to another, hence the name El Nino Southern Oscillation or the Enzo cycles. Now, El Nino is what is referred to as the warming phase of the Pacific, where the Pacific gets heated up, the Pacific gets warmed up. Now, because of these El Nino conditions, India receives very little amount of rainfall. Majority of the land areas, they receive less rainfall. 2023 was an El Nino year, where the average sea surface temperature of the Pacific on an average was 2 degrees Celsius higher than what normally it would be. Now, that caused a failure of southwest monsoon in India and also a weakened northeast monsoon system over India. So the impact was quite significant. Now, here, the present day prediction is that by this year, we can have the reversal to neutral conditions by the month of June or July. But few of the Indian weather specialists and organizations, they have actually predicted that we might have an El Nino or a La Nina condition by the time of August, September, thereby ensuring more than sufficient rainfall for India. But the trend, which is for the world to see, is the fact that El Nino is occurring very frequently. When we talk about El Nino conditions, these are the conditions which happen due to warming. Global warming is leading to greater frequency and stronger El Nino. Ideally, these El Nino events, they occur every 5 to 7 years. But because of global warming, they are repeating themselves every 2 to 3. And also, if the surface temperature of the Pacific goes very high, the impact of that El Nino will be much stronger as well. So that is where this El Nino recorded in 2023 was one of the warmest, indicating that furthermore it can get replicated very soon and there will be large scale droughts which can happen. All of this due to global warming, which is raising the sea surface temperature. WMO or World Meteorological Organization is the apex organization of the UN, which basically is responsible and is accountable for all the scientific studies, meteorological studies carried out. It is a successor of the IMO, International Meteorological Organization. WMO, along with UNEP, United Nations Environment Program, they were responsible for setting up of IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which monitors the climate change aspect, the emission of greenhouse gas emissions. WMO last year also came out with a report regarding the rising sea levels and the impact that it can have for the next 1,000 years. So that is what WMO is tasked with. Okay. Now let us take a look at the practice questions. So here, discuss the role of tiger reserves in maintaining the tiger population in India. Mention a way forward in order to curb anthropogenic interventions in tiger reserve areas. This is a 10-marker question. Here in the initial portion, talk about the tiger reserves ensuring unadulterated and a kind of a natural habitat, ensuring enough prey population for the tigers, maintaining the survivability of the tigers, talk about the tigers being a keystone species, how that is relevant for the survivability of forest in the long run. Well, then draw that schematic of the core zone and the buffer zone, talk about that in buffer zone some of the sustainable activities are allowed, but these anthropogenic interventions and construction activities, they are endangering and taking a toll at the and actually causing the fragmentation of the habitat, taking a toll on the tiger population also. Talk about that how the praise or the amount of food for the tiger that reduces, tiger grows weak, then interspecies rivalry basically can lead to the natural death also. Okay, what should be the way forward? Sustainable ecotourism and a kind of a measured approach in terms of the number of, let's suppose, resorts and tiger safaris allowed in a region, regular monitoring by NTCA, and strict punishment meted out to the violator. Now, immunity provided to the legislators are not absolute. Discuss in the context of the recent Supreme Court ruling. So here, in the introduction, talk about the privileges provided under Article 105 and 194 of the Constitution, what that talks about. Then in the body part, start by mentioning why, in the couple of sentences, why those privileges are provided to ensure freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and a neutral way of carrying out legislative business in the houses of the parliament. Now, and the state legislature also. Now, after that, change the paragraph, talk about, or in a form of a block diagram, talk about the PV Narasimha Rao case. And PV Narasimha Rao case, very briefly talk about that there, Article 105 was used and the provisions was used to grant immunity even in case of bribery charges. That has been reversed in the case of Sita Soren, where Supreme Court has said that this is not a portion which will be immune. Then talk about the fact that taking of bribe for casting a vote or for giving out a speech, that basically hinders the aspect of free speech in the parliament. And basically that can hamper the legislative business. That is why it is not immune. It is subject to checks and balances. And that is where the role of the speaker also comes into prominence. Okay. So that vice speaker and his role comes into prominence so that these matters can be resolved at the level of the house. The house should set an example by punishing the defaulting member. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the newspaper analysis. If you have liked the content of the video, please don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. Till we meet again tomorrow. Take care of yourself. Thank you for the patient hearing. Goodbye.